Welcome back to another episode of Sam's Fishing. On today's episode, I'm doing a how-to video. It's going to be how to skip cast. I've had a lot of requests for this video. It's a bit windy. I've sort of crept into a little corner section here, a little bay. There's not much wind. And yeah, I'll be basically teaching you how to skip cast, how I learnt, all the tricks, all the tips. So everything I know about skip casting. I've been doing it for probably about 5 years now. I use a Baitcaster. I'll put my Baitcaster down in the description. I got 30-pound surfex. The braid doesn't really matter too much. Too light might be an issue, but 20 to 30 pound on a Baitcaster is perfect. And when you first get started, this break here, I would turn it up a fair bit just so you don't get as many bird's nests. But just so that there's a little bit of tension on the spool itself. So yeah, I use 50-pound leader. I use the FG knot as well. If you are starting to learn as well, I'd recommend to use a spin rod, just so you don't have the drama of getting bird's nests. It's a lot easier with a spin rod. You might not be able to get it right underneath there perfect, but you won't have the drama of getting bird's nests all the time. So I definitely recommend to start with one of these. A lightish rod would be fine. I got a 2500 and a Samaki 5 to 8 kilo on this, and it's pretty good when you're skip casting. I'll put everything in the description below so you can go check that out and see what gear I actually use. So I got the Diezel minnow on at the moment in the candy color. I got a 3/8 head. This is a TT chin lock, snakehead chin lock, jig head. 3/8 is probably a bit heavy for skip casting. You want it to stay on top of the surface, and if you've got a heavier jig head, it will try to dive down. This is the Pop Frog. This is what everyone who's starting to learn how to skip cast should be using. It's just a TT chin lock jig head. There's no weight on this, so it's pretty perfect. The actual lure itself, the plastic will float on top of the water. If you can't skip cast these, I'd be looking at your setup or something, because you could hit this 90-degree angle at the water and it would still skip. That's how I learned to skip cast, and yeah, you can just give this a try and see how you go. Yeah, start off with the Pop Frogs, the Zman Pop Frogs, and then once you get really good at them, work your way and start, you know, Zman 4-inch Diezel minnows, and then Samaki 5-inch boom baits, and then you can work down to a heavier jig head, but always start off with a really light jig head. I'd recommend to practice with the spin rod and then work your way up to a Baitcaster. Once you got the Baitcaster sorted, you're all set. So this is the overhanging mangroves here that we're going to try to skip cast. It is pretty windy today. It's better to have the water to be dead flat, and that way it skips really smoothly along the water. I always try to be low to the water. If you're too high up on the water, it's going to be too hard to get that angle right to actually get a good skip cast. I do backhand, and I find that's the best way for me. So the way I start with about 2 foot, bit over 2 foot of line hanging out, and what I do is that when I start my skip cast, I try to be level with the water. I always say skip casting is like skipping a rock. You don't skip it at a real high angle because you're not going to get as many skips. You try to get down level with the water and throw the rock, so you're throwing it with the water. So that's the same way I do it with skip casting. Start low, end high. Start low, end high. So I bring my rod up as the lure is skipping along the water. As you bring that up, the line comes up, and that sort of helps the lure stay on top of the surface. There you go, that's a good one. start low with the rod tip, skip level with the water like you're skipping a rock, and then end high. So as soon as you get that first skip, the rod tip should already be high. That way it's pulling it out of the water. I'm actually sitting down here because it is bloody blowing a gale out here. So yeah, I always try to start my skip a bit early. Always try to be under 5 meters away from the bank if you're trying to get it into the snags and right up on the bank. And that gives you enough room to put a good skip cast in and skip it all the way up in there. Under 5 meters is probably perfect, depending on what you're flicking at too. But yeah, I mainly use just skip casting to get underneath structure. So overhanging bushes, mangroves, all of that, just to get it right underneath that. Branches, it helps a lot. And when you start early with the skips sort of level out so they're not so bouncy, because if you get them and they're bouncy, you'll bounce over branches. So if you start a bit earlier, the skip will level out as it's coming up to the overhanging bush, and then it will skip right underneath without bouncing over branches. So that's why I skip a bit earlier. So I'm just going to demonstrate how I do it with the spin rod as well. Same exact way as you're doing it with the Baitcaster, just a lot easier. I got the Pop Frog on at the moment, rod tip, level with the water, and then end high. So hopefully you've learned something today. I've tried to give all the tips I have, and yeah, hopefully you can go out and learn how to skip cast, or if you're already half skip casting, hopefully this makes you a little bit better. So yeah, thanks for watching guys.